start. It's like I can go way back, to influences. Um, but I am a teaching theater artist by trade in the past, where I'd work with youth a lot, trying to figure out how to lift up their voices, kind of starting with where they're at and what their needs are, thinking about their power, essentially, through youth theater work. And a lead up to that work was really studying various types of education, being influenced by a group in DC called Living Stage Theater Company. And John Holt's book, How Children Fail, was a major influence on me at that time when I was working with that group. And in that, he's an English kind of educational philosopher that really just talked about the harm that traditional school can have. And at the same time, I was reading A.S. Neill's Summerhill, which was a model very much like, I guess, Sudbury in North American context. And so as a young person, I was reading and thinking a lot about young people and their power and their voice to kind of be self-determinate about what they do and say and create around. And also ideas about really preserving our natural capacity to be curious and love for learning. And so all these phrases that we use, lifelong learners. My own journey was one where the most amazing experiences I had were with a few teachers, but really a lot of space to investigate and create and ask questions. And I could have really done without most of the 12 years of my own traditional public schooling, frankly, in terms of how I grew, and the skill sets and the interests and passions that I sustained really came from localized experiences, a few. And I feel like I was lacking for nothing in terms of motivation to want to create and do work in the arts and in community. And so I had my first child here in Baltimore a little bit later on in life with my partner at the time, and I'm in Parkville. And I was thinking, okay, Parker's about to turn 4. What are the options here, And knew about Sudbury indirectly, and could not believe that 7 minutes down Harford Road, 2 or 3 or 4 people had started a Sudbury school. I was actually looking at Fairhaven and what it would mean to commute all the way down to Upper Marlboro, just as an option. And yet here it was right down the street. And so we interviewed and began a process and sort of giving it a chance. My son, Parker, started at 5, and now he's 15, so he's 10 years in. It's the only school he's ever known. And then Keegan, our 3.5 years later, came along, and again, it's the only school he's ever known. We've been moving with a school, and now we're in our forever home, and it's been a really rich experience. I think the other thing I will say is, as a teaching artist, I've spent a lot of time in public schools. I was a long-term substitute in places like Memphis, Tennessee, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Savannah, Georgia, Richmond, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Alexandria, Virginia, and Baltimore City Public Schools. And what I observed a lot teaching there is a lot of control, a lot of repression, a lot of fear. I also work in the prisons, on the men's and women's prison in Jessup, and over time I kind of saw a lot of similarities about some of the patterns of living in life, including the environment, the lack of windows, lack of ability to self-regulate or have any freedom. And my work in the theater is really about cultivating a sense of possibility and freedom. And so that's what I would bring into those classrooms. And the kids were hungry for it and responded to it, almost against the backdrop of not necessarily having those spaces that made up most of their time sitting in desks, rank and file, to I'm not sure do what. So I guess seeing that, I do think, it's not, Sudbury isn't for everyone, but I will go out on a limb that think that some things that are going on in schools aren't necessarily good for young folk. I'm even going to use the word harm, and we could have a longer conversation about that, what that is. Here, the opposite. There, you might think, oh my gosh, what's being neglected in terms of subject matter and traditional ideas about school? But I've come to find that all of my kids' needs are being met, and When I compare them to young people I know from families who are living in suburbia, going to schools where they're trying to compete to get into top colleges, my kids lack for nothing in terms of preparation. In fact, I feel like they're prepared, even as prepared, or maybe even more prepared of how to negotiate what's coming after 12th grade.